Another thing that hit me today was I saw it on RT America that they neighborhood in Malibu, California, apparently was saying that they didn't want a food pantry to exist in their neighborhood because they didn't want those kind of people hanging around. Brought in the wrong crowd. 43% and rising of adults don't have jobs, which is to say they're unemployed. So that's a real rate of unemployment. Then when you factor in the underemployed, which is to say people who do not work even 35 hours a week, you get to more than 50% of adults. The problem is that we also have another 10 to 20% of the people that their jobs can easily now be replaced via mechanization. And if you put in basic income, which really you should just for the 43% that are unemployed, especially with me and many other people wanting the endless wars over drugs and money to stop, and therefore taking our troops home, and therefore cutting back our military by at least 50, if really, to me, about 90% in terms of personnel and in terms of money going into it, then all of those people who are now in the military, they would be absorbed via repairing, or shall I say, rebuilding our infrastructure. And therefore, you'd still land up with about 43% unemployed adults. And that brings again back to the need for basic income. People who are going to these food pantries, most of the time, we're not talking about homeless. Don't get me wrong, there's a significant number of people who are homeless. Out in Malibu, California, that area, that part of the country, just like in the New York metro area, there's a huge percent of residents that can't afford homes. And it's not that they don't work. It's not that they're unemployed. In many cases, they are employed in some regards, and or they're disabled. So they can't, and therefore they can't work. So you get the combination of people who, for the most part, by and large, either they are working or they can't earn enough to get a roof over their heads, and or many actually can earn enough, or at least with subsidy programs they can earn enough for a roof over their heads, but they still don't get enough for food. In part because SNAP allotments are not keeping up with costs of food. They're nowhere near it. In some parts of the country, they've actually outright gone down per person over the past 20 to 30 years. Especially when you factor in spouses and kids. They've outright gone down in terms of per person allotments, not up. So food costs have at least doubled, and at best, per person SNAP allotments have stayed the same, although again, in most cases, they've actually gone down. And then you have, in some states, single able-bodied adults who cannot afford food. They can't get SNAP. They're not deemed eligible. Some other parts of the country they are, but still, the states that they aren't, you have adults that have to choose either shelter or food. And since they really can't do that, they go to food pantries. These are hard-working people. And again, in some cases, they're people, though, that at one point they had jobs, but now they've been out of work for years. And then you get the fact that poverty eventually, if you're out of work for long enough, you will become disabled. which is to say, via looking for a job or via you realize you can't get a job and just trying to get to all of the programs that could give you aid and our horrible infrastructure in most of the USA, you will get yourself injured and therefore disabled. It is a matter of time. It is not a matter of if it will ever occur. It is a matter of how long it will take to occur. Or whether it'll just kill you outright. One or the other or both. And then there's the fact that, and again, we're not talking about someone saying, oh, I'm disabled and they're perfectly able-bodied. No, we're talking about people who, at one point they were indeed able-bodied when they started out, but they tripped on, and they fell a couple of times on loose patches of gravel along roadsides, and because they couldn't afford medical insurance and or proper care to get it set correctly, they ended up with permanently messed up arms in terms of shoulders and or both their arms and or legs that never properly healed, and therefore they really can't work anymore. Some cases it gets to the point of actually spine as well. Okay, some have been indeed hit by cars and other vehicles. Again, because trip and fall. And we're in the snow. A lot of them as well, malnutrition. When you have it long enough, it will also cause internal organ damage. Again, these are real medical problems that when you do not have a job long enough, you will eventually get them. It's not, oh, I'm faking, it's a faker. No, it's not a faker. It's that, again, you get hurt. You get injured from the debilitating effects of long-term poverty. And or injured in, again, looking for work, in moving around. And this is one of the reasons why basic income is so needed. And because right now what you have instead is you have all these assistance programs, need-based programs, in an uneven net throughout the country. And they're doled out by locality, individual localities, and then there's, in terms of city, state governments in some cases, and then you always get as well private ones in terms of charitable organizations that somewhat overlap but somewhat don't. And this hodgepodge, which costs so much more money than to just give basic income for people to actually spend it and deal with their own lives. Because what's happening with these charitable organizations and these local, city, and state subsidy programs instead is that what the person in need, in terms of people who are in these subsidy programs like my husband and I, we're actually paying for the salaries, okay, in terms of supporting the salaries via our need of all of these workers. Because if we were not in need as a large group of these programs, they would not have jobs. So, again, when it's talked about, oh, it's the leach factor, it's leaching. No, it's not leaching. Especially when you consider the fact that the companies that earn more than $10 billion a year, between 10 and 200 billion a year, every year, that they pay under 10% in taxes of their income. I mean, just in terms of for a combination of the joint braces that kind of in theory should be halfway covered but aren't, and I pay for it out of pocket, I pay more than 20% of my income yearly for those alone. And to me, that's like a tax. It really is. And of course, in terms of taxes, and all people that are in, lower income, we pay more in sales taxes because we need to buy things more frequently. We can't buy in bulk. Occasionally I could buy food in bulk, but it's rare. But everything else, I need to buy lower quality items more often because I can't afford the one-time purchase. And then sometimes I use tape and whatever to make it last longer. Okay? So again, when you consider that in our ridiculous country, feminine hygiene products are taxed via the luxury tax system, okay, you have to understand how ridiculously stilted things are and aid in really revamping things to make them make sense. And again, if we sell off the buildings and if we therefore stop all of the salaries for all of the people and all of the workers at all of these needs-based programs, city, state, local, federal, and all of these charitable organizations, again, stop paying all the salaries, it will be a lot cheaper than a basic income, even with regional cost of living supplements. So you'd give everyone a better quality of life, especially those, in the most dire need. And okay, you give an extra drink or two to those that are wealthier. Okay, if even that in terms of money. Okay, because flat out, for me and my husband, if you gave us each about $2,500 a month, we would be able, to live fuller quality of lives and not have to always be wondering, how are we going to make it through this month? How are we going to make it through this week? And at the same time, in the five boroughs of New York City, a wealthy person could spend that $2,500 on just plain drinks in one night. Now, again, for my husband and I, that would provide us, in the same part of the country, a good quality of life without heck of a lot of struggle. But yes, again, it could be blown really quickly if someone is wealthier. And my thing is, if I get to have that decent quality of life, I'm happy with that other person blowing it on drinks. I really am. Because again, it gives me the freedom to be and feel safe. And if it gives them a little bit of pleasure, no problem. Let them enjoy and let me enjoy. And let us both be at peace. Shalom.